Students demand the ability to select roommate based on race, and the university is prepared to grant it. Of course, don't be a bigot and notice that both the demands and the authority belong to the same political party that used to do these things before. Speaking of bigotry, the highest echelons of the Cathedral Media, such as the BBC, Deutsche Welle, The Guardian and others, have started to sound like us 4 years ago when it comes to the topic of rising violent crime in Sweden. So which is it? Noticing the crime is hallmark of far-right bigotry, in which case The Guardian is now a far-right publication, or maybe the Cathedral was just too far left and it's slowly readjusting to reality. Think about the answer. Anyway, reports are coming in that Los Angeles is now likely enriched with leprosy too, in addition to typhus and rodent-transmitted tuberculosis. Please don't notice the political party running the city, because that would be bigotry, of course. In other news, the recently ended No Nut November was a far-right conspiracy. Rural Americans are bad people, according to a university professor. Supporting Greta Thunberg is white supremacy, and women are oppressed under the dictatorship of the thermostat. To alleviate some of that oppression, a militant misandrist in London opened the world's first vagina museum. These are our stories on Periodic Insanity. Hello everyone, and welcome to the 29th installment of Periodic Insanity. Well, it's been, 8 months, give or take? Something in that ballpark, since I haven't made a Periodic Insanity video. Anyway, one great advantage of doing this rarer is that only the top-tier insanity ends up in the show. The great disadvantage is that a lot of stories pile up, and when I do want to make an episode, I end up with a list more appropriate for 3 or 4 episodes. Anyway, we'll see. I'd prefer not to go longer than 3 installments in a row in order to preserve energy for the more important series, the Good News video. So, given that there are so many, I will also include a few older links, and by older I mean from the last 6 months or so, because hey, why not? Anyway. So, the first, coming from The Guardian, world's first vagina museum to open in London. Quote, in a bright indoor space in Camden's Stable Market, a giant tampon is flanked by giant menstrual cups. Illustrations of female genitalia are dotted around the walls, and some underwear is in a glass case. This is the world's first vagina museum dedicated to gynecological anatomy, which opens this weekend in northwest London. The museum exists thanks to a public fundraising drive, with more than 1,000 people collectively donating almost £50,000. The director, Florence Schechter, says her motivation behind setting up the space was simple. I discovered there was a penis museum in Iceland, but no vagina equivalent anywhere else, so I decided to make one, she says. When asked more about her motivation, she adds with a smile, I just love the vag. I am a bisexual woman. The first exhibition, which will run until the end of February, is called Muffbusters, Vagina Myths and How to Fight Them. It looks at misconceptions that surround gynecological anatomy, including cleanliness, appearance, period, sex and contraception. Just under 50% of the world's population has one. Most of us came into the world through one. Yet vaginas and the rest of the gynecological anatomy are still a taboo subject, a poster in the exhibition reads. The show also quotes a YouGov survey in March, which found that more than half of the British public surveyed could not describe the function or visibly identify the vagina, the labia or the urethra. Sarah Creed, who curated the exhibition, says these facts surprised her. The facts for me were astounding. Half of people surveyed did not know where the vagina was. I thought that was one thing people did know. Also, for me, it was a statistic that 1 in 5 adult women think they have to remove a tampon in order to urinate. That blew my mind. Creed explains the various elements of the show, stopping at one section which focuses on the myth that public hair is unhygienic. Underneath this claim is the statement, it's actually more hygienic to have it. Creed says, quote, "Your vagina does not smell like a bouquet of flowers, nor should it. This is not a thing. None of your body organically smells like that. People licken the vagina to the armpit and say, oh, I have a smelly armpits. I'll just put deodorant on it. No aerosols, please, around that part of the body." Also, people don't realize we have a very delicate bacteria microflora ecology down there. You cannot have a product for all vaginas because everyone is different. Okay, so so far, it doesn't really sound insane. In fact, I was very close to dismissing this story as a candidate for periodic insanity. Pun not intended. But then I read the rest of the story, which spirals from meh, whatever, all the way up to full lunacy. Here it is, quote, "As well as the exhibition, which is also available to view online, events and performances will take place in the space, including comedy and a book club discussing feminist literature. The space also includes leaflets and information about vagina health, and it has a shop selling everything from vulva postcards to vagina museum cups and guitar plectrums." Creed says, quote, "We are an LGBTQ plus ally and an intersex ally. Intersex and trans individuals are not represented at all in this narrative. We're looking at how we can engage all people. I want cis heterosexual men to come here and feel it is a space for them to come and learn. In this post-Weinstein era, there's more fear than there is inquiry because people do not want to be seen as inappropriate, but they are part of the conversation. People have wives or daughters and friends, people with gynecological anatomy, and in order to interact with loved ones in an effective way, they should know more about them," close quote. What does an educational effort to tackle the admittedly terrible statistics of way too many adults falling short of basic knowledge of female anatomy, what does that effort have to do with Weinstein or trans individuals? See, this is why I'm always skeptical of any initiative of so-called sex ed being allowed in schools, especially in state-run schools. Because there has yet to be a single case anywhere on the planet where such an initiative was not hijacked by, well, essentially the loony bin. Because it's one thing to have an initiative that goes along the lines of, look, a slight majority of the population doesn't know basic anatomy and I'm going to do something about it. Almost nobody would object to that. But then it's a whole different issue when you go about it full of militant, extremist, activist lingo and outright fake news about it. And yes, using language like cis heterosexual men is inherently extremist activist lingo, whether you like it or not. Nobody that uses such language unironically should be allowed anywhere near children or educational endeavors or be lent any credence as if they know what they're talking about, because they don't. This lady is a militant extremist, nothing more, nothing less, and should be treated as such until she chooses to no longer be one. Still, I really hope she's wrong when she quotes the stat that allegedly 1 in 5 adult women think they have to remove the tampon in order to urinate. If that's true, the United Kingdom has much bigger problems than the lack of a vagina museum or the lack of inclusion of transgenders into the vagina narrative or the rest of that nonsense Sarah Creed is going on about. Jesus Christ. And I wouldn't be terribly surprised if this had been the case. I mean, the UK routinely tops the European charts as having the highest teenage pregnancy rate on the continent. So maybe it is true that a fifth of their women don't know how to use what they have between their legs. Terrible. Anyway, sticking with The Guardian. Is your home constantly set to a sexist temperature? You're not alone. Are you a victim of thermal bullying? Does your partner or roommate always get their way when it comes to how hot your house is? If you answered yes, then stay strong. You are not alone. According to a new study conducted by researchers from Ohio State University, a lot of households contain a thermostat dictator who rules the temperature dial with an iron fist. As it turns out, there's a gendered nature to this. The thermostat dictator is normally a man. The study, Thermostat Wars, the Roles of Gender and Thermal Comfort Negotiations in Household Energy Use Behavior, examined temperature discussions in 112 Ohio households. They found that men tend to get their way while women are more likely to be forced to compromise. It's possible that women are losing the thermostat battle, the study's lead author told CNN. This hints at a status quo gender bias in thermostat settings that leads to a home thermal environment that does not cater to women's preferences, close quote. I mean, how do you come back from this? The people quoted in the story are academics whom we are supposed to respect and not consider a priori as being disdainful idiots, even though almost all of them are. And from that position, they seriously make a press statement using the phrasing status quo gender bias in thermostat settings. And you thought I'm the extremist when I said that if someone says he or she is an academic, start from the premise that that person is significantly dumber than the dumbest person you ever met. Usually, that turns out to be the case indeed. And in the rare cases that the presumption ends up not being true, at least you get a pleasant surprise. Studies have shown that being pleasantly surprised from time to time is helpful for your own mental health. So why not set up yourself for, pleasant surprises? There could be a solution to this, though. Women could take a page from the harsh landlords over in England and lock the thermostat box and require a license in order to access it. Maybe I should shut up now, because I'm giving them ideas. And I wouldn't be totally surprised to see a petition asking the government to ask for a license for thermostats in the name of gender equality. I could totally see that happening in England. All right, let's move forward, because there's a lot of insanity to cover. Which one should I do? Yeah, this one. This one is fun. News Hub. Supporting Greta Thunberg is evidence of white supremacy, activists claim. Quote, the 16-year-old environmental campaigner has gained international visibility for her climate activism, including a fiery speech to world leaders at the United Nations General Assembly, where she accused them of stealing her dreams. However, some are questioning, why Greta, a white child, is gaining so much attention over indigenous activists. They say that Greta is benefiting from a global system of white supremacy, which has given her privilege and a platform. You all need to ask yourselves why you find it so much easier to hear from white people, regardless of age, when it comes to the violence they have caused across the world, no white survivors tweeted. It is a symptom of a global white supremacy that certain people are heard and given a platform. Certain people have access to the resources to be the heroes that the world will pay attention to. Greta at the UN was the epitome of white privilege / white power equals save white kids, another tweeted. Others point out the work that people of color have been doing to protect their communities from environmental destructions and say that it is being ignored by the focus on Greta. All caps, indigenous people have been warning everyone all over the globe about climate change for decades, one person tweeted. There is no mention of them now that this is mainstream, just Greta. I'm glad to see so many sharing at Greta Thunberg's hashtag how dare you message, another tweeted. However, indigenous peoples have been saying this for 500 years, so it is not a new message. Her message has political and cultural authority due to white supremacy. White environmentalists are indeed urged to support and raise awareness of the work done by people like Canadian Indigenous teen Autumn Peltier, an advocate for water protection of the Great Lakes, and Little Miss Flint, a youth activist raising awareness of the U.S. city of Flint water crisis. Close quote. So, let me get this straight. The only way to dissent from the Greta cult and still be one of the good people is to become a militant racist? Because all other attempts to refute the outrageous claims made by the Greta cult ended up in a lot of whining and spurious accusations. But picking up on the front end's race seems to have gone down slightly easier. This is a bit interesting. And yes, I do mean it when I say Greta cult and the front end, because Miss Thunberg is merely an avatar for a bunch of political operatives who quite literally act as her handlers in everything related to her name and face. Of course, in a normal world, this would count as child abuse, but in Sweden it's only child abuse if you raise them into the wrong religion, namely Christianity. If you raise them in the religion of special needs or in the climate cult, then everything is fine. In all seriousness though, we might need a Danish or Norwegian 14-year-old who likes fossil fuels and nuclear to balance the discussion out. If the 14-year-old is a bit black too, then that's even better, isn't it? Alright, now let's head to elitist clowns. Plenty of those lately in the United States, whereas in the past those used to be more visible in Europe. I guess in Europe the elitist clowns have become slightly more accustomed to sometimes losing the elections. I don't know. What I do know is that the outburst of elitist buffoonery has been stronger in the last few months on the other side of the Atlantic. Here's the first one. Rolling Stone, how a new meme exposes the far-right roots of hashtag No Not November. I still can't believe this is a thing. And it's the second year in a row when elitist snobs whine about the fact that No Not November exists, basically. Anyway, quote, if you spend a lot of time in certain extremely online corners of the internet ecosystem, you've likely stumbled onto hashtag No Not November, or just @N for short. An annual challenge encouraging men to refrain from masturbating or even for many having any sex for the month. No Not November was initially created as a parody of internet-born phenomena such as the Ice Bucket Challenge or Movember, skewering the silliness of viral internet challenges along with the more extreme claims made by proponents of NoFap, an anti-porn subreddit with 500,000 members. No Not November has no connection to NoFap, though the two are often conflated, and NoFap will sometimes post hashtag No Not November memes on its social media pages, says Matthew Plummer, a community manager for NoFap. For most participants, the challenge is essentially an excuse to shitpost as well as tweet memes skewering some of the more exaggerated purported benefits of abstaining from masturbation. But there are many who take it seriously, with at least 52,000 people as of this writing diligently documenting their day-by-day progress and setbacks on the subreddit No Not November. The moderator of that subreddit estimates that approximately 90% of the posts are from people actively participating, and also there's the occasional fallen member who stays on the subreddit for the community and laughs. On its surface, No Nut November is a fairly innocuous challenge. While it may seem silly to abstain from masturbation for virtually no reason, some of the memes are pretty funny, and the month of abstinence, whether it be from sex or masturbation, certainly isn't going to kill anyone. The moderator says the goal isn't to demonize porn or masturbation per se, but to prompt men to examine their own masturbation habits. In my opinion, most originally participate in the No Nut November for the meme aspect of the challenge, but as the days goes on, people begin to see how big their porn or masturbation dependency is, he says. Plumber also says the general goal of NoFap is not to discourage masturbation in general, but to encourage men to temporarily abstain from the practice and return to moderate, porn-free, non-compulsive masturbation. Yet it would be naive to ignore there's significant overlap between the general ideology behind NoFap, and to a degree No Nut November, and that of the far right, which has increasingly co-opted the principles of masturbation abstinence. Because the challenge is associated with abstaining from porn, some people associated with the movement have taken the extra step of harassing adult performers on social media, giving it an additional layer of troubling implications. In the past, No Nut November has always been like, oh, look at this ridiculous thing some people are participating in, says adult performer and director, whatever. This year, people in the industry are talking about, oh, actually, this is connected to the far right, and maybe we shouldn't just be saying, ha ha ha, No Nut November. A new meme brings these implications into sharp relief. Coomer is a reference to a meme of an unkempt, skeezy-looking bearded man in a white tank top with vaguely Semitic features, accompanied by descriptive text like doesn't even know anything about politics, extremely aesthetic right arm, huge muscle, and has never heard of NoFap. It's been circulating on 4chan for the past year, but Alex Hawkins, the vice president of the porn tube site X-Hamster, says he started seeing it in the replies on his company's Twitter feed back in September, when presidential candidate Andrew Yang tweeted about limiting access to pornography. At first, we didn't really know what it meant and thought it was funny, he tells Rolling Stones. Then in October, the Coomer resurfaced thanks to a Twitter campaign led by the username Teapot Lad, in which users vowed to change their avatars to the Coomer should they fail No Nut November. PewDiePie shouted out the campaign in a recent YouTube video, as did far-right YouTuber Paul Joseph Watson, who is perhaps best known for being one of the many extremist figures, including Milo Yiannopoulos and Alex Jones, to be banned from Facebook. Okay, Coomer. Sorry, but I just can't read the whole garbage while keeping a straight face. And no, I won't tape multiple cuts of me reading this. The links are in the low bar if you really want to farm the keks out of this low-level elitist trash. Of course, the article goes on to then say that the Coomer meme is anti-Semitic because why not? I mean, after all, it's not like the Rolling Stones and the left in general are arguing from a position of reason. And keep in mind that they put this article in the culture section because, you know, promoting wanking is a part of culture. Really? I mean, is it, though? And how much of an elitist do you really have to be in order to write in an influential publication about a meme? And why so angry? Why so salty? I mean, yeah, sure, most of the narratives that purport to show the benefits of abstaining from masturbation are at the very least exaggerated, but so what? Yeah, sure, it's true, abstaining from masturbation absolutely does not make you stronger per se, but it doesn't make you weaker either, so why all the fuss? Even more so, the Rolling Stones piece itself acknowledges that traffic in porn-prevalent areas of the internet runs unabated and that generally there is no solid evidence that No Nut November is having an effect more than a bit of fun on the internet for a few users, some funny memes, and not really anything more than that. So why all the fuss only in left-wing areas of the press? I mean, well, with the exception of the US edition of The Spectator, which churned out a hate-filled article against PewDiePie, using No Nut November merely as an excuse to throw more insults at the Swedish guy. All the other articles complaining about No Nut November are from the left to the far left. And notice that I only focus on the press because the porn companies have largely focused on trolling or simply ignoring the issue. X-Hamster is actually the outlier, not the norm, and it's because the leadership at X-Hamster is, well, mostly formed by Coomer boomers, really. So, why all the fuss? I'd go with stupidity and slow news day for most of the cases. Surely that has to be the case with the Rolling Stones, since their own stupidity got them in court paying out millions of dollars as a result of the batshit insane stuff they've printed in the not-so-distant past. But there are, in my opinion, cases where stupidity and slow news day is not good enough of an explanation. For instance, last year, the New Statesman wrote a much longer article calling No Nut November insidious, which is a polite way of saying counter-revolutionary, which is exactly what they meant. I believe that amongst the honest ideologues on the left, many of them orbiting around New Statesman, by the way, there is a huge fear of any narrative that may even inadvertently question their own worldview about sexual affairs. And they have a reason, in a way, to be afraid of that. Leftist history has a pretty nasty episode about this. When Stalin came to power, he not only questioned, he physically removed the Leninist narrative on sexual affairs, which, by the way, was indistinguishable from the one being promoted today by the far left. Few people realize that the left has its own fears, and instead of dealing with them, they project them upon others. I suspect that's the other part of the reason on why the self-ascribed intellectual left is so bloody triggered by No Nut November. The rest is just smokes and mirrors, then further fueled by trolls or by people who simply don't know better. Engage in No Nut November, well, next year now. Or don't engage. You do you. The more important aspect, however, is to always make sure you ignore the idiots. For the sake of your own mental health, first and foremost. Laying too much credence to out-of-touch loons who spend so much time on an issue so trivial as this one can seriously damage your mental health. And yes, that goes for the loons at New Statesman and Vice, as well as for those who spend way too much time trolling on Plebit or Twitter. Anyway, time for me to listen my own advice. Enough with this. Let's go to the next elitist trash. Okay, here it is. Fox News. UC Berkeley instructor calls rural Americans bad people who deserve uncomfortable lives. Quote, a UC Berkeley graduate student and instructor took to Twitter to shame rural Americans and those who aren't pro-city. Jackson Kernion, who has reportedly taught at least 11 philosophy courses at the California University, made the comments last Wednesday. I unironically embrace the bashing of rural Americans, Kernion wrote in a now-deleted tweet. They, as a group, are bad people who have made bad life decisions, and we should shame people who aren't pro-city. Kernion started going after rural citizens, saying they should have higher healthcare, pay more in taxes, and be forced to live an uncomfortable life for rejecting efficient city life, Campus Reform reported. Brad Blakeman, an adjunct professor of public policy and international affairs at Georgetown University, called the comments nuts on Fox News Night Monday and said cities need to take care of their own because rural America is doing just great. Fox News contributor Doug Schoen added, quote, we started as a rural country. We remain at our heart linked to rural communities. Thank goodness for small towns, farms, and traditional values. Kernion appeared to apologize on his private Twitter account, reportedly calling it a bad tweet he would reflect on. My tone is way crasser and meaner than I like to think I am, he also wrote. UC Berkeley did not return a request for comment, close quote. Ouch. This guy is really out there. Now, The bad part is that this guy isn't some fringe loon. He subscribes to mainstream lunacy on the left. He's just sorry that he got caught saying out loud what most left-wingers seriously believe. And this is not a new left thing. Disdain for rural folk has been part of the left for over 100 years, with very few exceptions, and those exceptions were limited in time, namely when leftists couldn't run the cities. To add insult to the injury, this loon taught philosophy classes. So imagine what kind of a top-tier education the students are getting from someone like this. This is why I always say that the best decision you can make is to avoid going to college to begin with, especially if you're an American. I mean, why go into six figures debt in order to hear this loon? And many, many, many others like him as well. Why ruin your financial health for the next 20 years at the very least in order to feed what are essentially communist institutions? Because make no mistake, these people hate you. They would gladly sign off the order to send you to the gulag, and the only thing stopping them for now is just that their propaganda sucks and doesn't convince enough people. Well, that and the fact that the army is simply not willing to join them. But if they could, they would not just increase your taxes, they would put you to the gulag. Speaking of which, you have a chance to send me to the gulag. We're at about 11 or 12% into the fundraiser for the minimum threshold. So do chip in if you want to see me in the gulag and also learn some more stuff from the field about what the gulag meant in practice. Gib shekel, serious. Anyway, as I was saying, this guy is not alone. The thing is that he'd have a better case if the leftist-run cities were indeed better, but they're not even by a long shot. Here's this one. MSN doctor warns of leprosy in Los Angeles. Quote, leprosy, a deadly disease from the Middle Ages, has re-emerged, threatening a number of homeless people in Los Angeles. According to the CDC, between 100 and 200 new cases of leprosy are annually reported to the U.S. In the U.S., Dr. Mark Siegel, a professor of medicine and medical director at Dr. Radio at NYU Langone Health, wrote in the publication The Hill. Dr. Siegel added a USC study discovered that most of the 187 patients with leprosy who were treated at its clinic between 1973 and 2018 came from Mexico, where the disease is widespread. He also noted that leprosy remains more prevalent in Central and South America, with over 20,000 new cases diagnosed annually. Given that there is certainly the possibility of sporadic cases of leprosy continuing to be brought across our southern border undetected, Dr. Siegel said. The occurrence led Dr. Siegel to issue a warning that the contagious disease that is spread by respiratory secretions and nasal droplets in close proximities will soon affect nearly 60,000 homeless people, 75% of whom lack temporary shelter or enough hygiene and medical care in Los Angeles. The Daily Mail reported that leprosy, or also known as Hansen's disease, affecting 250,000 people worldwide yearly, is caused by the bacteria called Mycobacterium leprae. It attacks the nerves in the body, thus results to the peeling characteristic of the skin, as per the CDC. If the disease is left untreated, it could progress to paralysis of the hands and feet. I'm much more concerned about the permanent disabilities that come with leprosy, given that 2 million to 3 million people are affected worldwide, than I am with the associated stigma, Dr. Siegel said. Leprosy occurring among the homeless in Los Angeles is a certain formula for instant public panic, he added. Yet another epidemic transpired with the spiraling homeless problem in Los Angeles. Typhus. A report in June by the Los Angeles Times noted that the CATS USA Pest Control surveyed areas outside of the city hall and nearby buildings and cautioned that homeless people are creating harborage for rodents. They detected bad sanitary conditions like leftover food, human waste, and hypodermic needles, and suggested that the city withdraw the homeless people inhabiting the civic center. Dr. Siegel stated last February that simply cleaning up the garbage in identified typhus zones will not settle the problem because people who have nowhere to go and throw their waste will just continue to accumulate. More garbage means more rats, which means more fleas, which means more typhus, he said, close quote. The very efficient living in the cities, huh, Mr. Lefty? And it gets worse. Areas in California, in addition to typhus and leprosy, have rodent-transmitted tuberculosis, typhoid fever, and cholera. To put it bluntly, the cities in California are a fucking shithole. There's no way around that, and that is kinda insane, isn't it? I've been this year deep into the third world. They take public health a lot more seriously down in Zimbabwe than in Los Angeles, at least judging by the statistics. And every time anyone mentions this, the response is usually, well, but it's still better to live in Los Angeles than in Harare. But is it? I mean, it is an increasingly serious question. Sure, it may still be the case for now, but the difference between Harare and Los Angeles is no longer self-evident. In fact, many cities in the so-called third world can unironically sue for slander if you compare them to Los Angeles in particular. Which is why it is important for non-leftists to try to take back the cities. Because the left not only takes them into the ground economically, but it quite literally fosters disease, which eventually will spill over to the rural areas too. Now, you can complain about my extremist speech all you want, but the fact remains, prolonged leftist leadership in a city is quite literally, by the numbers, a source for disease. Now, speaking of disease, Los Angeles isn't exactly the only one. There are many other cities that increasingly suffer under various diseases as a result of prolonged leftist rule. Deutsche Welle, bombs, shootings are a part of life in the Swedish city of Malmö. Remember, this was a far-right speech just 4 years ago. Go back to my older videos when I was saying similar things, but at the time, the English language press insisted that all of this is just a result of crazy conspiracists' rich imagination and racism. Except it's not. It's very real. Quote, an attack that left a 15-year-old dead has spurred police to redouble their efforts to fight gangs in the southern Swedish city. Bombings and shootings regularly shake Malmö, so much so that the locals find it normal. At times, it seems like Malmö has more in common with Baghdad than with other European cities. This year, 29 bomb explosions rattled the city of 317,000 as of November 11. Police reported 50 shootings in the Malmö region by the end of October in a country where guns are hard to come by legally. So you're saying that gun control doesn't exactly work with people who don't abide by the law? Who would have thought? Formerly an industrial town known for shipbuilding, Malmö has remade itself since the Öresund Bridge, which connects it to the Danish capital Copenhagen, opened in 2000. Sweden's third biggest city has become a knowledge hub, with a new university drawing students from Scandinavia and abroad, and more companies, including gaming industry giants Massive and King, setting up shop on the eastern side of the strait. It's also the country's most diverse city. Around a third of its people are foreign-born. Malmö residents are used to seeing almost daily reports about violent crime. On Tuesday, for example, public broadcaster SVT reported that gang members had forced a grocer to allow them to stash drugs in his city center store. Police have been struggling to contain the violence, which they attribute mainly to gangs that deal drugs. The latest efforts have been prompted by a November 9 shooting in front of a pizzeria, which killed one 15-year-old boy and put another in the hospital. Police declared a national special event and set up a task force to quell gang violence. It's time, and it's good for the people in Malmö and the people outside Malmö, says Federico Moreno, a reporter who has covered the city for over a decade. Every time they shoot a kid, it should be something special in that everyone should react. It's important that the police send a signal, and also that the state is showing that we have to send a signal. That sounds insane. Anyway, though many of the victims and perpetrators have been connected to gangs, bystanders have also been hurt or killed, such as 31-year-old Dr. Caroline Hakim, who was shot to death in August on the Malmö street as she held her baby in her arms. This is something that worries Petra Metz, who teaches Swedish to adult immigrants at a school in Fosie, a neighborhood considered troubled and where numerous shootings have taken place. Metz says it scares her to ride her bike home after work in the dark, but she worries less about her own safety than that of her 3 children aged 13 to 18, especially after a gang-related shooting that failed to kill the intended target but left 3 young men dead at a gamer cafe in June 2018. If it had been 1 month earlier, maybe it would have been my son who was sitting there, Metz says. Her oldest child had spent time at the cafe weeks before the shooting. Metz has considered moving away to escape the danger, but she said the sacrifice for her children, leaving friends, school, after-school activities, would be too much. I gave up, Metz says. I thought that soon they will be old enough and they will leave for another city when they go to study. She says friends with younger children are thinking more seriously about leaving Malmö. They may be considering Staffanstorp, a 20-minute drive away. The municipality published a video days after the pizzeria shooting, encouraging city dwellers to escape the violence and build a new life in a place like the rest of Sweden should be. The spot has been viewed more than 250,000 times. Actually, it was a nice spot. I love Malmö, said Moreno, who has no plans to move away despite the threats he received for his coverage of gangs. He describes a reporting trip to Mexico where people were terrorized by drug cartels but still managed to go about their everyday lives. I feel that sometimes you can also get used to something, he said. For example, when I speak to people who tell me they are changing their rooms as if it were normal, I'm changing things so that if a bomb explodes, then my children won't get hurt. I think it affects us, all of us, he said, even if we don't really understand it at the moment. Violent crime in Malmö has declined since 2017, when a total of 58 bombs exploded and 81 shootings took place in the region. But there's still a long way to go until it loses its reputation for crime. Malmö, in a way, it is a catastrophe, Moreno said. But it's also a very beautiful city and lively. It is really different from other Swedish cities and in a positive way, close quote. Notice that almost all of the articles that mention violent crime in Sweden include the mandatory passage that violent crime has allegedly dropped. But they never tell you, compared to what? I mean, that, my friends, is a scientific lie. It's not technically wrong, it's just imprecise enough in order to manipulate gullible fools. Yes, crime dropped a little bit compared to 2017 by roughly 2% or so, but it's still about 500% higher than in the year 2000. Well, actually, it depends on the type of crime. Rape is up by more than 3,000%, and bombings on a yearly average are up about 1,000% compared to the year 2000. Or let me put it this way, there are more explosions with criminal intent in Malmö in a year now than there used to be in the whole country 18 years ago. That is insane. Malmö, yes, routinely feels more like Beirut or Baghdad rather than a city in Europe. Yet we're still being told that it's Trump who's the insane one when he mentions these things. We're still being told that we're far right when we simply notice things that happen in reality. The solution is the same as it was in 2015. Keep forcing the opposition to speak on the issue. It's working. What was marginal speech on the non-left in 2015 is now on the front page of Deutsche Welle and The Guardian and the BBC, and that, my friends, is what winning the narrative looks like. All right. I think there's room to squeeze one more story. Let's take a truly insane one. Students demand ability to select roommate based on race during days-long sit-in. This one is a beauty, but it's too long, so I'll cut quite a bit. Quote, the chancellor at Syracuse University has stated that he will actively work with a group of students who have issued several demands meant to address a racism issue at the school, including the institution of a new policy that would require students to be offered an option to choose that their roommate share the same race. The demand to allow students of color to elect not to room with students of other races was one of several such demands issued by a group of protesting students who aired their concerns about racism on campus during an ongoing sit-in. Syracuse Chancellor Kent Syverud spoke at the sit-in in a live-streamed exchange. Calling themselves Not Again SU, this group of protesters is calling for the chancellor to resign if he does not sign a document conceding to the list of demands by Wednesday. Even before the given deadline, over 1,000 protesters have already petitioned for his resignation online. The general consensus is that black students, and we're talking specifically on behalf of black students, may feel safer and better rooming with other black students rather than saying the same race has an implementation of a profile system or a portal system that includes interests as well as race. A representative of the student protesters said during the meeting. Chancellor Syverud responded saying he spoke with students and learned that they had good reasons to fear roommates who harbor views of racism. He stopped short of agreeing with the demand, however, saying that he's having housing experts look into it. Now, skipping a bit, Syracuse University students increased their list of demands after racist graffiti was found in a student dormitory on November the 7th. The following week, more racist graffiti was found in the campus physics building, along with 2 swastikas found elsewhere and an anonymous email sent to student association members justifying the incidents. Wanna bet 400 shekels that they drew that themselves and they sent the email themselves. Anyway, the university also recently announced their suspension of all social activities within Greek life for the rest of the semester after some members of a fraternity hurled a verbal racial epithet at an African-American student. Other reports have surfaced of people using racist slurs against individual students. Among the additional demands is the insistence that the university change its anti-harassment policy to a zero-tolerance policy for hate speech. Syverud told the crowd of protesters that he has spoken with people who believe there is a hazy, unclear line between free speech and hate speech, and that he's not going to take a position on this policy at the moment. Students are also demanding that the university spend $1 million on the creation of a unified required curriculum that educates students on diversity issues, specifically anti-racism. Syverud has already agreed to this demand, stating his belief is that required staffers and planning are not going to be under $1 million. The university already spent $5 million on a social justice center in 2018. Skipping some more, the student representative who spoke about allowing black students the options of selecting their roommates by race offered an explanation of the reasoning behind the demand. We want to advocate for this portal, and people have the option to, whether you self-identify as whatever you self-identify with, you have the option to pick someone who could be the same ethnicity, has the same interests as you, has the same race as you. We want it to be an option, so changing that rhetoric, we don't advocate for the same race, we're advocating for a safer environment for black students to feel like they are safe to be black, he said. The hashtag #NotAgainSU organizers recently added yet another demand, this one insisting that the university grant immunity for all the students participating in the campus sit-in protest. We're referring to possible sanctions for violation of conduct, a representative of the group said. We were told that certain sanctions were going to be carried out. That's a threat of it possibly being carried out if we stay here. The students have occupied Syracuse University's Barnes Center since November the 13th, and they plan to remain in the building all day and night until Wednesday. Participation in a peaceful protest, given the events that have happened and the dialogue that needs to continue, should not be subject to any discipline, said Chancellor Severud. The protesters enjoyed a visit from an emotional support dog and were provided with pizza by the university. Someone even brought toy blocks for students to play with. Protesters continued to shout down university administrators when they tried to field their questions. Let's talk about spending $23,000 to have Sean Spicer come here, one student yelled, referring to the university funding the college Republicans hosting Sean Spicer this coming spring. That's gonna make me uncomfortable. This university has stolen my mental health, she added. You want me to pay full tuition that those white students are paying? For what? For a university that stole my mental health? I hate it here. Well, then fuck off if you hate it there. Another student yelled, I hate it here, and protesters joined him in chanting these words. My girlfriend could tell you how many times I sat down and I cried in her fucking arms, he shouted. What a cuck. A third student sitting in the crowd complained that she was supposed to be taught a course on critical whiteness, but that all her white professor did was make microaggressions to her. Numerous public officials visited the campus sit-in, including Syracuse Mayor Ben Walsh, New York State Senator Rachel May, NYS Assemblyman William Magnarelli, and NY24 Democratic congressional candidate Dana Balter, who is also a professor at the university. Different musical groups on campus are performing dances and sing-alongs at the protest. That looks like a party. And the Black Lives Matter group came to host a teach-in. Of course they did. The University Student Association issued a statement encouraging the sit-in. Once our demands have been met, our protest will immediately cease. Until then, our protest will proceed indefinitely. Close quote. This is not a university. This is not even a kindergarten. This, my friends, is a mental asylum. And not just any mental asylum, but one that is without doctors and run entirely by its most extreme patients who've been off their meds for too long. And I'm very serious about this. I've seen many commentators trying to play the moderate card of, oh, but maybe there is some point that they might have. No, there isn't. There just simply isn't. Asking the university to facilitate racial segregation for you is not a reasonable point. It just isn't. Asking the university to spend even more shekels on extremist agitprop after they already did just that a year before is not a reasonable point. Keep in mind that this university is the alma mater of the CEO of the Clinton Foundation, of Joe Biden, and of Marilyn Loden, which is the author of the conspiracy theory of the glass ceiling. So it's not like mental disorder is something that just happened overnight at this university. No. Judging by their most famous alumni, almost all of them having promoted in public at least one conspiracy theory or extremist agenda, this seems like a factory for this kind of disorder. It's just that this time things are going too far and it's blowing up in their faces, in which case I say, bring on the popcorn. I mean, seriously, this kind of insanity should not be indulged. And the government should simply stop guaranteeing the student loans for universities who don't abide by the First Amendment and Supreme Court rulings. This could be a good step in the right direction. Ideally, no student loans should have any government involvement. In fact, that's why college is so expensive. But baby steps. Let's start with these uncontrolled and uncontrollable mental institutions masquerading as universities first. And, then maybe work from there. Jesus Christ, man. A sit-in protest because a speaker you don't like spoke in a room you weren't in. It's long overdue for adults to take charge of this, really. And they will. If not this generation, then in the next one. Some way or the other, this will be corrected. The question is how? It can be done the easy way, by economic pressure, some enough narrative and just plain old common sense. Or it can be done the hard way, by way of bankruptcy, or it can be done the very hard way, by way of violence. One of these will necessarily have to happen. And it's up for the adults to decide which one is better. The longer you all wait to decide, the more likely it is to get the very hard way. And it's not just me saying that. Even left-winger Bill Maher started noticing that too much of this insanity ends in violence, and he's not wrong. But hey, what do I know? I'm just a dude on a couch with a clown nose and a camera. Well, actually 2 cameras. Farming insanity from the news cycle. Yeah, enough with this. With all of that being said, let's stop here and move the remaining links into the next episode. Hopefully just one more, although probably there's going to be 2 more. Thanks a lot for watching. Thank you all for your consistent and generous support, generous financial support. Don't forget to subscribe, visit our website, and by the way, visit the library section of the website. We add new links to non-PC topics almost daily. If you derive any value from the work being done here, please consider giving a shekel. And I will see you all soon on the Freedom Alternative.